Ko Graham Mahau, he kaiwhakahaere hono hapori mo te whare toi, nā reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everyone, my name's Graham Frost. I'm the Public Program Specialist here at City Gallery Wellington, and welcome to tonight's edition of City Talks. City Talks is an ongoing series initiated by the New Zealand Institute of Architects Wellington branch and presented in partnership with City Gallery Wellington. Just before we get started, I'll just mention a couple of housekeeping points. We are still in the middle of a pandemic, so we appreciate everyone keeping their masks on if possible during the talk. And afterwards we'll have food and refreshments outside, and of course you're very welcome to take your mask off to enjoy food and refreshments. In the unlikely event that we have an emergency here, just follow the directions of myself and our gallery staff at the back of the auditorium. The fire exit is just on your right at the far end of the space, and we'll direct you through and out of the space safely in the event that we have an emergency that causes us to evacuate the space. Without further ado, it's my great pleasure to pass across to Robin Simpson, who's our chair for tonight's panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham, for that introduction, and really great to see you all masked up. Kia ora katoa. Thanks to the City Gallery for having us here, and thanks to all of you for coming as part of this discussion, and thank you for all the participants who I think are on a live stream, so participating in that way, so it's actually much greater than this room here. This is, as introduced, one of the City Talks and organised by Te Kāhui Whaihanga, and a very topical issue to talk about. So I'm Robin Simpson. I'm an urban designer, I'm an urban dweller in Wellington, and I'm a landscape architect. I practice in Wellington, but also give advice across other places in New Zealand. But as I've been saying to a lot of people, it's not about me tonight, it's actually about our panellists here who have decided that they're able to join us, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we've actually got with all of you. I'd like to welcome, I know there'll be a lot of professional people here because it's an institute event, but there will be others who are not professionals, and that's really great if there are people like that present, because this is actually about not just the profession, but about the community and what that interaction can be, how we can make it better, and how it can contribute to Wellington's future. So what we're going to do tonight, I'll introduce each of the panellists, and each of them are going to speak for about 7 or 8 minutes, and then and it's about their general field of interest actually, and then we're going to, I'll get each of them to focus on a particular project that might be really of interest to everybody in the room to talk about. It might be a Wellington project, or it might be such as Angela's Tinder app, which might be relevant
design, this is not for general
for other locations. Yes. Anyway, that's coming. So the focus is Wellington's future, and there's a lot of conversations going on about Wellington's future at the moment, and there probably needs to be more, and there will continue to be as we go on from here. And it's also about ambitions. Now, we're deviating slightly from the flyer that went out, and instead of talking about visions and why they're not happening, we're going to take a bit more of a positive approach and look at activities or processes that actually can help those ambitions be achieved in a positive way, rather than why it's broken now, if it is. And we could have a very different group of panellists here, and we'd have a very different conversation. So as I said, let's hope that this is just one of many. Now, the common thread that goes through the panellists is that of citizen activity. So, to my left here is Angela Foster from architecture practice Foster in Melville, an architect and urban designer. And Angela believes that urban designers and architects are in a unique position to champion active citizens. So she's going to explore that today. On the far end, we've got Farzad Zamani, who's here from Wellington City Council and also bringing his background in both studies and practice to that. He's an urban designer, and his interest is in democratising the design of the city. So we'll be teasing that out as we go. And to Farzad's right is Sophie Jerram. Now, she's not here representing Wellington City Council. She's got a really diverse practice, so refers to herself as an urbanist and social practice curator. Is that correct, Sophie?
Thank you.
And, maybe you can give some explanation on that. But she is managing the implementation of the Ahotini strategy, which is about fostering arts and artists in Wellington City. So we're going to start with Angela. And Angela, if you'd like to take the floor, and I'm going to give you a little nudge after if you go on a little bit too long. Thank you.
Thank you, and kia ora everyone. I'm a principal at Foster Mill Architects, and my interest is urban design. I've been working in commercial architecture now for probably 30 odd years and really enjoy the urban environment. It really fascinates me. And so just so happened actually, I recently completed, or I hope I completed a master's, a couple of months to find out. But I undertook a master's just out of, really because I popped over to Melbourne and it sparked a curiosity with me. There's one slide which has two.
It's up.
Oh, sweet. Okay, so what happened is I went over to Melbourne just with my partner, having a wonderful weekend, and sort of looked around and went, wow, Melbourne's changed. And I sort of looked at it and came back to Wellington and went, something's missing. And as you can see from those two photos, it was a bit of a Google search, so thanks Google. But we have Melbourne on the top, and they were both of these Google images were taken from the same spot. And as you can see, Melbourne's intensified. Now, not to say that all urbanism is about intensification, but I think it's symptomatic of change. And so when I came back to Wellington, I thought, well, this is really irritating me. Why is there so much difference in a, what was that? That was a 10-year period in Melbourne and not in Wellington. So I ventured on a master's, which started to compare the two. Interestingly enough, partway through my research, I found out that Jan Gehl, and those of you who are interested in urban design know that he is basically the father of Copenhagen, I'd say. So that was an industrial city in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was dying. And he came along after his research in Italy and went to the Danish government and said, hey, look, I can do some stuff for you. And so he used his research to reinvigorate and start a campaign and worked with council to make a city for the people. And if you research this, when you go home, you'll find out that he's done a myriad of projects all around the world, and he's responsible for some of our most amazing urban environments. Now, fortunately, in 2004, it was actually Kerry Prendergast at the time. She, under some guidance of the urban designers, Stuart Niven, I think, and I can't remember another couple, but they convinced her to have a chat to Jan Gehl. And so he came across and wrote a report, a 65-point report for Wellington and how to progress the city. We'd already started. So it was really about, and at the time, Gail said how fantastic the city was because it was so walkable. It was such, it had some great streets. It had the real good bones for a fantastic city. And so he said about writing the report. Similar time, Melbourne engaged. This is just after they started the laneways and realised that their laneways were starting to work well, so they did the same thing. And interesting enough, whatever happened, I think there was change of politics and mood. Unfortunately, Gal's report got put to the side. Wellington, I think, sat back and went, oh, look at our waterfront, isn't it cool? We don't have to do anything more for quite some time. So we didn't. And unfortunately, now we re-engaged, I think, Gal last year for Let's Get Wellington Moving. And I can't find the report anymore, but there was a report on the website which is now just a summary from Let's Get Wellington Moving, and it said that basically, yes, great, tick, we did the cycleway. The other 64 points you're still waiting for. So here's my report which says just do the other 64. Probably slightly paraphrasing there. But anyway, not that it's council's fault, by the way. Politics plays a very large role in how the councils are able to facilitate urban design. And as such, probably when I started to look into Melbourne, I realised their political system is very, very different. There's the central Victoria, and then there's City of Melbourne. They have a city architect, which we don't do. And they also embedded, whoever was there was a few visionaries on board in 2004 when they first engaged Gal, and they took on board the fact that urban design and cities are a moving and a constantly growing organism, essentially. So over the next sort of 20 years, or 18 years, they've re-engaged with Gal, made sure that their document, which is more like a design guide rather than a district plan as such, it is constantly moving and constantly being invigorated by feedback from people. They haven't got everything right, but their plan is such a way that it's nimble and they can move. Unfortunately, the first district plan created for Wellington was when I was about 17 and just starting practice, or just starting in the architecture industry. And okay, I'm just starting into my 50s and we're up to plan number 2. So I'm really hoping that the next one will be before I'm dead. And that's, as I say, poor Fars sitting there. It's not about the council. It really is about the political will. And the political will is the people. And hence the Tinder app. So that's where that sort of comes in. And it's about engaging with everybody. And everybody is a participant and a citizen in the city, and they have responsibility. They can't just sit back and go, hey, cool, we've got a great bridge, civic centre, which is almost here. And, and a fantastic waterfront, which we do, but it needs to be continually worked on, and the people need to be behind that.
Great.
20 seconds.
Imagine.
I know. Impressive. Angela, thank you for that. Now, what I didn't say earlier was that after all the panellists have spoken and talked about an example in particular, we've got lots of time for discussion. So think about the questions that you want to raise and dialogues that you want to have with the panel members. So we'll come back to the Tinder app, and I'm also going to ask you a question about, you've mentioned the government architects or city architects which are present in Melbourne and South Australia, and just wondered how you saw that might fit into the whole picture here.
Yep.
So we'll come back to that shortly. So our next speaker is Fars. Now, I've got this fabulous biography for you, Fars. And I found out his full name, Farzad Zamani, which is wonderful. Faz is from the Qashqai tribe in Iran and completed his Bachelor of Architecture there, well, in Iran itself, moved to the UK to undertake his Masters, and moved then into private practice as an architect in Nottingham in the UK, is that correct?
Yep.
And from there moved to Aotearoa and did a PhD in urban design at the University of Auckland. And in that PhD, which I'm hoping he comes out in this discussion, he analysed the relationship and the conflict between people, power structures, and city designers. So I've got a timer on him for 7 minutes. I don't like my chances, really. There's a lot to say. And 2 years ago, he moved to Wellington, and he's working at City Council. So he's currently the acting manager for the City Design Unit, and that is soon going to become called the Manager of Urban Regeneration and the Design Team. So he said he feels at home in Wellington, and discussed that almost being a patriotic commitment to the city, which is wonderful to hear. And he's interested in housing, urban regeneration, and in particularly this idea of democratising design processes. Thank you, Faz.
Thank you. Tēnā tātou katoa, ko Faz tō koinō. My name is Faz, and thank you for having me. And that's true, I get really upset when people bag Wellington. Not cool.
That's why I'm in the other chair, right?
That's good. I'm going to probably cover some of the things that I did in my PhD, but I'm going to talk about, there was a question in the events description that how Wellington defined itself, and I would change the question how Wellington designed itself, and I tried to unpack that question. To understand the question and to answer that question, I would like to kind of describe what is the process now that the cities in New Zealand generally and Wellington they designed. You've got basically 4 kind of different players. First is the experts, with position of powers, people like me that make decisions, unfortunately. And then you've got the local politicians and policies and acts and the legal framework that the local government work within. And then you've got central politicians and the things that they do. And eventually you create a framework, you create a vision, certain objectives or policies, and you deliver that to the market, and market delivers that through architects, designers, landscape architects, people like you. And if you look at that process, the role of people and their voice is kind of quite formal and minimalistic, and that's the problem that I want to unpack, specifically around the issue of design. We have some level of engagement around the planning frameworks, but when it comes to design, it's like a black box. People don't know what's happening, and you eventually see the project happen on the ground. So that's why kind of when I talked to Robin, I was like, I would like to talk about the concept of democratizing the design and how that can be done. In order to do that, this is my personal opinion. I'm not saying that this is kind of an evidence-based kind of approach. And I did quite a lot of research. You know, let's put aside the politicians, and I know that's very hard, but we need to kind of put them aside. They're quite, yeah. And let's think about the other ones. So you've got this triangle of city design, and you've got people up there. We all work for them, and we serve them and the next generation of people. And then you've got the experts, people like me, making decisions. And then on the other side, you've got the designers, artists, intellectuals, writers, those people that they're visionaries of the society. And unfortunately, the bottom bit of this triangle is quite heavy. Like, we have a lot of power, and that's fine. But the problem is that the people don't have much power on the top. So when you look at the design of the city, not the planning framework, but the design of the city, you see kind of quite limited knowledge of what is design, or what's a good design, or what's a good city. And you see quite a minimalistic approach. So what can we do is that the first thing, council needs to change the way that they behave. I need to open up, and I need to go out and welcome to be positively agitated. I mean, you don't need to insult the council officers. They're just normal people. But I need to be confronted with new ideas and what is the good thing. I need to go and talk to architects and hear what they actually want. I need to go to primary school and listen to kids and hear what they actually want. This city is for them. So that's the first thing I need to do as council. The second thing is people. And I want to give shout out to skateboarders. I know a few of them here. They harass us, you know. They're like, we want skateboarding. And that's cool. We want that from everyone, because then every time we design a laneway or a park or a street, we know that skateboarders are concerned. They want things differently. I want everyone to be like that. I don't want people to be scared of contacting council and asking for different things. And we get that, you know, the skateboarders, we had the young woman kind of asking us to make more safer public spaces. We created Pornicky Promise as a result of that rally. We had businesses asking for parklets, and we ended up having a parklet program. So I really want, if you have kids, ask your kids to write a letter to council and ask council what they want. To be honest, it's going to work. Eventually, someone in council will say, fuck it, I have to deal with this. It will work. And the last thing is the challenge that I want to put to the architects. I think at best, your vision and ideas are kind of consumed and absorbed by the commercial interest of your clients. And at best, you write for basically your industry's magazines, and they're quite fancy and flash and expensive. And who reads them? It's the same people who wrote them. You write for each other, and that's really cool. We need that. But when you open like Dom Post, you don't hear from architects talking about what kind of a city they want. We in council, we barely hear. We put the district plan out for kind of the draft district plan for consultation. We've got 2,500 submissions. That's 0.01% of the population of Wellington. Out of that 2,500, there was only one submission around a design problem and a design solution. Only one person in Wellington. That was Guy Marriage, so all credit to him. Thank you. But I do appreciate that, and I don't know why we have that lack of engagement of the architects. I understand, you know, they have the kind of commercial limitations. They have to pay rent and mortgage. But if there is a desire for a better city, everyone needs to get involved and do something for that, and directly. And I know Sophie's going to talk about that a little bit more, but that's my kind of message. If we want a different city, if we want a different future for Wellington, you need to get involved, because otherwise we're going to design it without you. That's going to happen.
Oh, nice one, Saz.
Yeah, it is a challenge and an open invitation for lots of things to be taken to council. Faz, you've been involved in the greening network, and when we come back, I'm just going to get you to talk a little bit more about that.
Sure.
Because it's actually a really important strategy, and it's got some very important ambitions that I think there's a lot of people who aren't aware of it, and it's actually in the implementation phase now, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So we'll come back and have a look at that. So our last panellist tonight is Sophie. Now, Sophie Jerram, I'm going to read your bio too, Sophie, if I can find it. Yes. Unfortunately, Sophie's a very active person in lots of diverse activities, and so I could go online and actually get sort of quite a lot more information, so filling in the bare bones. So Sophie is also an urbanist, and she's a social practice curator. And her considerations are really focused around artistic practices and their relation to landscape And Sophie, I'm taking it with that for landscape that you also refer to landscapes of the city?
Urbanscapes, exactly.
Urbanscapes, absolutely. So, is this feedbacking? Okay. She's not here representing council, but as I said, she's currently the program manager of the Ahotini strategy. And this strategy is designed to further support arts and artists in the capital. And the focus on that, is on activating the city's places and spaces. So at the same time, she's busy, and she's a research fellow at the University of Auckland and bringing artistic practices together with forest health, which is intriguing. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. Sophie is co-founder of Urban Dream Brokerage, and fortunately, this is an Urban Dream Brokerage book. She's brought some along that'll be available afterwards, so you can have a look at or purchase those books then. And their role, you've probably experienced and enjoyed some of the activities. It's working with property owners and managers, artists, individuals, community groups. I threatened to throw my phone at Tina if it started making noises. For projects where underutilised or empty spaces can be used for urban regeneration. Should I take this off? Do I need to switch it on?
It's on.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Great. I'm actually going to straight away hand over to Sophie. And her last thing, you're one of the co-founders of the Vogelmorn Community Group, which is based up at the bowling club. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. Great. Sophie, thank you.
Kia ora, Robin. Ngā mihi kia te koutou, ko Sophie Jerram toko ingoa, and a great pleasure to be here tonight in person again. It's lovely to reassemble, isn't it? Greetings to the esteemed architects in the room and members of Parliament, Chloe, and to our online guests. Nice to see you all, imagine you all. And yeah, it's beautiful to be here. So thank you, Tina and the NZIA local branch, for making this happen again. I was really thinking about this idea of what is the future of the city, and I realised, of course, that by thinking about the future, we're thinking about what the heritage is that we're going to leave now, and kind of thinking almost in reverse, that the heritage that our children, grandchildren will experience is that which we're caring about today. And it's something that Robin mentioned. I'm working with the University of Auckland as well as being based here. And I'm working on a bioheritage project. It's called Toi Tau Whakatairanga, and we're commissioning artists to work with forest health all around the country where myrtle rust and kauri dieback are affecting the forests. And you think, what's this? You'll be thinking, what is this to do with the urbanscapes? But in fact, I feel like there's quite similar threads, that with bioheritage and the future of our forests and the future of our cities are deeply connected, because it is about what we choose to care about, right? So by working with understanding that myrtle rust and kauri dieback are affecting our forests, we're understanding that those trees, the rako, the ngahere, are vital to a biosphere, but also to cultural heritage for local people, for other species, for many interacting parts of the world. And in the cities, we have we're getting used to a sort of similar nexus of interactions that we have. Mark Lindsay's in the audience tonight. He's helping roll out this new heritage strategy that Wellington City is also looking at producing. And I'm really excited, even though I'm not here representing the city tonight. I was invited to join before I joined the city. It's really exciting to know that there are some fantastic people, as you've heard, working with the city, and Mark's one of those. There's a really great, intelligent group of people working for the future of Wellington, I believe. Anyway, that's a plug for the current job. I'm probably still in the honeymoon phase of working. But the reason, I guess, Tina asked me to get involved in this talk is that I'm really excited about how we make the citizen involvement in the city more permeable. with democratic processes. And Farzad and I have had lots of conversations over the last few years and months. And just to touch on this Urban Dream Brokerage as a project, maybe you might put up the website, Graham. That's Vogelmore. We'll start with Urban Dream Brokerage, which is something that came out of a project called Letting Space. And Letting Space came about when my kids were, I think, 2 and 4, and I was feeling like, where could I be in the city? I was full-time looking after my children and wondering, where could I be in the city that gave me shelter, where I didn't have to pay for a coffee? And you might have heard this kind of issue before, but it's something that often young parents just find. And the library, of course, is the best space in the city for that. But you can't hang out in the library all day. And so where do we find ourselves spaces to be and feel that we belong in the city? Now, Letting Space became a kind of series of commissions of public projects, like the Free Store, which has now become a permanent entity at the top of Willis Street. But then it became a brokering of spaces for other people. And I'm pleased to say that after a bit of a lull, that it's now a legacy project for me. We've passed it on to a new group called Maverick Productions, who are running the brokerage. So you can bring your ideas to them and they'll help find you a space, facilitate a space. There's not a lot of money attached necessarily to the project making, but you can get the space for free. And we run projects with the Urban Dream Brokerage that run from 2 or 3 weeks to 5 years. So, depending on the length of your idea. So this was a project to get people involved in thinking about how they could stand up their creative initiatives. And then it went on, the Vogelmore slide, thanks Graham, is another site that I'd really recommend if you've not been there. It's a really exciting place for a lot of theatre and music goes on, but there's also been a fantastic Syrian restaurant, which is Damascus, and Hassan came from having a food truck down on the waterfront, and he wanted to stand up his idea, which was to run try out his amazing, I was going to say tabbouleh, but it's obvious, but shawarmas and little Syrian pizzas. I've forgotten the name of them, but there's no cheese on them. Amazing. He runs 3 days a week. He runs a restaurant, but the rest of the time it's actually run as a space for community. There's a toy library operating. There's a cafe operating that our trust subsidises, so that it's a meeting space where you can come. You don't have to buy a coffee, but you can. So we're trying to mix up this idea of, I guess, what is known as third space or commons spaces, where we can, and we as a trust, feel, I think it's been worth our effort, because we've got a kind of a regenerating community around us, and when the disasters have hit, as we've had power outages and floods, we actually can rally together as a community. So this is the kind of project which actually has ended up me in the job with our Houtini, rolling out the strategy of the council, because they could see that this is a potential that art practice can and creative communities can lead towards a sort of more resilient suburb and city. And I'd like to just finish on saying I'm with Faz and the skateboarders, I think really lead the way in terms of visibility. I'd like all artists and creative people and urbanists and designers to actually be as visible and vocal as you guys, because and I've been sent some beautiful videos that make me cry of 13-year-old Brazilian skateboarders winning the World Cups. That this is about fantastic ways of being present and active and using the city, because it's for all of us. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Sophie. And I'm sure there's lots of things that you can pick up on and come back to in that discussion. Look, thanks all of you. And if I go back, Angela, I keep being drawn to the Tinder app. but first, I'm really interested in this discussion about city architects. Now, we're focusing on processes at the moment, and I suppose in many ways, there's lots of talk about NIMBYs and YIMBYs and QUIMBYs. I'm probably a self-confessed quality in my backyard.
Nice.
And there seems to be a very big gap here. Can you just reflect on the role that the government architects play in the Australian states, and also how you might see that? Is that something that would start walking into the gap that we've got here at the moment?
I guess a city architect is probably more politically neutral, which I think is really important, because we've only got 3-year terms and I've lived here for 30, 40 years, so I want something that's consistent. And I think Farzad's division is actually going some way to do that. I think in set up Melbourne and Victoria and South Australia and Copenhagen, for example, the city architect is very much the person that gets engaged to facilitate the consents. So they are the ones that see all the projects coming through and provide advice. The really cool thing is that one of the people underneath the city architect in Copenhagen is now working alongside Fars, which is awesome. So I think developing that real design focus on all the projects that come in at the moment, the way that our systems and our central government systems as well as our local government systems is set up so that planning is very key. Like the RMA, the words design and urban are non-existent in the RMA. Even after its 700 and something or other revisions, we still haven't got the word urban and design in there, because it's not about that, it's about planning. And we need to design our cities before we plan them. So that's probably where the city architect is very key, because then they champion design.
So those city architects are actually from much bigger populations than we have.
Copenhagen's not.
No, Copenhagen's not, is it? That's right. So I just wondered if in New Zealand you thought that was more relevant at a national level.
We always think we're small.
Yes.
Yeah, but we're not, you know. The population of Reykjavik is the size of Wellington. And yet they have a very design-focused environment. I think you have to just think big.
Great. Now for the Tinder app. Go.
That was I think I was saying to you before, it's like engaging with my mother. She has Facebook, I have Facebook, my son has Facebook. Can we not just have something that covers all demographics? The unfortunate thing at the moment is, I remember one of the first I was doing the museum apartments, the QT Hotel, and we had somebody who came to the notified consent, and he was a bit of an agitator, and he was in Karori and said that our building was going to interrupt his view, and I'm like, you're in Karori. You know, he was the only person who had time to come down and lay a complaint, so he got his 15 minutes of fame, which cost my client, you know, so much money to have this guy listen to. And it's like, well, that's fine, but how about all those other people who dwell in Wellington? You know, can't they have an opinion too? And we'd like to hear from them. So I think something that's as simple as an app. I mean, we're pretty much an app culture now, I think, and something, you know, swipe left, love it, Fars, swipe right. Yeah, maybe.
So I think the app is a
nice and quick
hotline to Fars.
If he gets 50, he gets a pay rise.
That's great, thank you. Not for you to answer, but something to put out to everybody. What we're talking about here is people being more participatory and having more of a say. So far as you've called for this. And, excuse me everybody, I can't manage my phone, as some people know. Now I've put myself off. What was I saying? What did I just say to you?
Participation.
Participation. How do we differentiate or expand from the participation of the one voice from Karori about the view? Is there a difference there? How do we make sure all of those voices are there rather than very singular and very one-sided, which could or could not be somewhat negative. So
Negative is fine, because everybody's got an opinion. That's fantastic, but it would just be great to hear from, because there is a general demographic that responds, and I think Faz and their team are probably quite well aware there is a very vocal demographic, and it would be really nice to hear from the skateboarders more often on the district plan rather than the street. Well, everything. Them and all their friends, you know. The city is for everybody, so we really need to hear from everybody.
yeah, that's really great. And Faz, if I can just go back, I do want to get you to talk about the Green Network. But what are the gaps that you see? You've put out a challenge to everybody here to give more feedback, and so we've got a much fuller engagement of people. Who are the majority of people that you hear from?
Not the full guy in Karori.
Well, perhaps not identifying people or groups, but the areas of interest.
Okay, let me think how I'm going to answer that. I can see the lawyer of council is looking at me.
Well, you might want to go straight on to the Greening Network.
No, I think it has changed in the last few years, and I said as examples of the skateboarders or the businesses that, they asked for parklets during the COVID time. Over 3 months, we ended up with a parklet program. We had, during the district plan process, so you have the usual, what is kind of in the media, so I think it would be very safe, the people, the NIMBYs, or people that they kind of quite concerned around density or intensification. They've always been vocal, but I think the last few years we had a shift in terms of a more diverse kind of discussions around equality in terms of housing affordability, housing supply. So it is kind of moving towards that direction. That's a good, and I think we need both. That was my whole point. We need that healthy confrontation. We need that discussion rather than a one-way chat. I don't like that. So what you kind of hear in the media around the council projects, you hear mostly around oppositions. And I had a chat with one of my friends that, they're like, why we don't do this? And I'm like, why you don't ask your councillors to do that? And that's the kind of the things that we don't get. So when we put something, we have this reactive, whether it's positive or negative, we have this reaction. But what we don't hear is that positive, proactive demand for better things. I don't know, like I've got a couple of neighbours in Newtown, they came to us and said, can we have a playground? And we were like, yeah, sure. Where do you want to put it? And they were suggesting to remove a few of the car parks. They had a lot of car parks in that specific street. And they're like, can we remove it, like 4 of these car parks and have a playground? First, we have to answer them. And that's the thing that people don't know. You think that when you send an email to council, someone needs to actually respond to that email. You can't leave it there. And eventually we have to get together, like people who work in local central government, eventually there will be some bloody working group or something, figuring out the solutions and put a business case together. But if you don't do that, you may never get that playground. If you do it, in 2 years you may have a playground. Your kids may not benefit from that, but the next generation will. So because it takes so long, people shouldn't be disappointed, people still should engage. It's for the next generation. It's for this, even for this generation. I love to see playgrounds all over the place. So that's what we need more, the positive ideas. And architects, we need more from them.
Thank you. And just going on to the Greening Network, have you had a lot of response about it? And was there a lot of response about it when it was actually out for consultation?
First, I need to kind of put a disclaimer. I haven't personally worked on this document. My ex-boss was here, Crystal, and a lot of other people in council, Joe Blunt, Amy Hobbs, Caitlin, they worked on this document, and it's like an amazing visionary document to turn Wellington to a green network and kind of create this network of blue and greener spaces. And interestingly enough, that had the support of all sides of the political spectrum. It was positive. Everyone loved the green, spaces, I mean. And it was kind of quite well received from the public, from the councillors, politicians. But that's one of the problems that I think we have. We come up with these ideas or these plans that they're quite high level, and then people completely forget about them. And that was the challenge that I wanted to put out. When you walk down the street, if you see a street that we can plant a tree, please remind the council, can we have a tree here? Like, it's as simple as that. And if you keep doing that, eventually we end up doubling the tree canopies of the central Wellington. As you can see, it's not much comparing to Auckland. You can see the percentages is not great. We have the town built, and that's the kind of that's the catch basically. If you add the town built, these percentages completely change, and it's great, it's awesome city, it's very green. But when you exclude the town built, the central city doesn't have much greener spaces. So when you walk down the street, please remember, if you feel there is a need for a tree there, ask the council to plant a tree. It works. We will plant a tree eventually.
Is there actually a goal or an ambition?
Yeah, they have we have all the kind of local government things. We have targets and business case and implementation plan and all that jazz. But when people put pressure on council, I know my team gonna hate me for that. The parks team gonna hate me for that. But when people put pressure on council, is the parklets was a perfect example. During COVID, businesses said, I don't have time for business cases. Can we have parklets? And in three months, we had to have parklets on the ground, and it happened very quickly because the executive leadership, the management, they see the need, the urgency that we need to do something now. So, if we declare climate emergency, but we don't really act on it on the ground, it will stay as a plan or a policy. We need to, if this is adopted, which it is, we need to find out how we can implement it faster and better. And that's our problem, but if there is political and people's power behind it.
Great, thank you. And I'll just go to Sophie now, because it's related. You talked about the bioheritage being different to the built environment, or someone I've been reading lately is Dan Hill, who's just been appointed to University of Melbourne, to the head of the department which has planning, design, environment studies in it. And he wants to stop using the word built environment and talk about the living environment to expand what's actually happening there. So in a city like Wellington, the bioheritage is actually fully integrated as part of the city. It's actually not a really separate thing at all, which Fars is what you're talking about as well. So there's certainly plenty of opportunities there. I've got another situation that's in the back of my mind at the moment that I was concerned to be informed about, and that is probably a much more traditional sense of heritage. And that is the Church of the Christian Scientists in Willis Street, which is a very early Athfield building, which I understand is on a site which is proposed for intensification and development. I know not much about it beyond that. So on one hand, we've got bioheritage, where you can get in and take action and bring different views into it. And then on the other side of it, we've got that very traditional view of heritage. Do you see that these can come closer together by looking at them in a slightly different way?
Yes, I mean, if I can answer, I don't know whether we have a bioheritage strategy for the city. I was doing this kind of jumping to the forests in the remote parts of New Zealand when I was talking about the connection. But I'm kind of interested in how, I'm aware of the Athfield building, and Mark Ambury wrote a good piece in the paper on Saturday, if you've not seen that, about the potential demolition of that amazing church. But I think that we actually need to take a look as Pākehā and say, hang on, there's a lot more heritage that we're not that we've actually completely forgotten and has been brought to our attention, but we keep on. I mean, the city council is a colonial institution, and we need to be remembering there are many more sites like the streams that run under our city that have been covered over. And Liz Mellish, who, when she was the 10th Trust chair, said to me, when we uncover our streams, we're uncovering our people. And I think that this is something that keeps on coming back and back. As a receiver of ideas through the Letting Space and Urban Dream Brokerage, the Waimapihi stream keeps on returning as a project that I think the city might have to do something about, because it's a stream that starts at Brooklyn Hill and runs through Ara and then down, as you probably all know, under the Z station, and then ends up underneath Te Aropa and then under the State Opera House. And it has a kind of wairua, and I think that's the kind of heritage actually we should be really attending to in the city, which of course connects biological and cultural heritage. And that's beginning to come through, right, in the plans of the council, but the council was a colonial institution, right? And so it's a bit awkward. Often the council has to play a sort of a schizoid state because it's employed some wonderful people to help, but we're not mana whenua. The council is not mana whenua. So we have to, I think, create really structures that have, create spatial authority, the right sort of spatial authority that mana whenua have to be able to negotiate more ideally with the city council. So, yeah, I mean, it's a long process, and it's about relationship building, as you all know. And in our arts team, we've got a very good, we've got some good knowledge, and we've got a great collaboration with a unit called Mātaho Aranui, and they're really helping us kind of strengthen our cultural knowledge. But I reckon that's the future of heritage, is for us to go much deeper. And yes, of course, Athfield's building's wonderful. And I was fighting for the Build 2 mass building in St Matthews in Brooklyn for a while that was demolished. We wanted it to be turned to another community centre and co-housing unit. Anyway, it got demolished, and then when we found that this district plan actually did register it, but it was well after it had been demolished. So we do need to notify them, but there is some deeper stuff for us to work on. Yeah.
City Library, we lobbied, I think everybody lobbied council to save that. So
yeah,
that worked for the social.
It does work.
History side of Wellington.
There's T. Hay is an architecture firm which is working with us on Te Matapihi, the future library, and that they're struggling, I suppose, with the postmodernism of Athfield's work in the 80s. I mean, it's a great active conversation we have about how do we make that a bicultural building for the future. So, the future is bright, I think, with all these fantastic people that are working on it, and I think keeping the conversation fluid is really important. Yeah.
Great, thanks Sophie. I now invite you to ask questions of any of the panellists or have a discussion with them. Now, I know that Emily, who's been part of the organisation, has been fielding questions from the live stream. So if you want to get in first, be fast, because if there's big gaps, we'll get Emily to bring some of the questions from people who aren't here in person. Would anyone else like to follow this first question, that we can just organise a little bit?
Kia ora koutou. He mihi atu kia koutou mō o whakaaro nui. I'd thank you, Sophie, for talking about the role of mana whenua, and in particular with the waterways. I work in a workplace where we're learning all about those waterways by naming our meeting rooms after them all. And that's created a lot of discussion, and the top floor meeting rooms are named after the Māori names for the mountains. Anyway, that's aside. I'd like to hear from the other two panellists about how you approach the challenge of ensuring your urban design, both the actual design and the democracy, which, as you probably know, is done a little bit differently in Te Ao Māori, and how you approach the challenge of ensuring that our tangata whenua are represented in that design. And I'm one of the people that Robin mentioned at the beginning is not a professional, so.
Kia ora moerangi.
Sophie is married to my cousin, that's how she knows my name.
Tēnā koe. One of the examples that I can use probably was the design guides of the district plan. That the district plan was very old, it's very outdated, and one of the biggest problems we had, there was no reflection of mana whenua and Te Māori basically in the design guides. So we talked to Rebecca Kiddle, and with Becky we basically engaged with Tānaki Whānui, Tātiawa and Ngāti Toa, and we had a number of hui with them, and it was very fun for me because when I entered that space, a lot of things that we discussed were not necessarily the district plan or design guides matters, but generally about how it's designed the city. We eventually managed to kind of come up with a number of principles that mana whenua were kind of happy with and accepted. We included all of them into the design guides, which is notified today, so you can submit on them. But the process that we went through and kind of building that relationship and friendship and sharing kai and hearing them, that was a huge learning process for the officers to understand where they're coming from and what is the process, what is the tikanga. And eventually we included all those kind of tikanga principles into the design guides, which is the only statutory design guides in the country. But also they discussed having some kind of Papakainga design guides included into the documents. We couldn't have it as a statutory bit, and I remember I emailed Roger to use one of his buildings, the Papakainga in the design guides, and that's the first in the country too. And they were very happy, and they were like, no one actually approached us. It's kind of interesting. Council is, I don't just call it colonial, but it has a kind of a racist history too, and I'm quite confident to say that no one really engaged mana whenua to talk about the detail, about the specifics, and that was the first time that we had that kind of conversations, and we ended up with a really good place. But one thing that I learned too is that it doesn't end, and that's the problem with the law of disengagement. That you engage and say, okay, the project is finished, bye-bye, see you later. It shouldn't be like that. We should constantly engage in with mana whenua. They are our partners, they're our stakeholders. So that partnership needs to continue with the implementation of district plan, with making it operative, with every single project. So that Green Network plan, that's one of the biggest kind of next steps around Green Network plan is kind of working with mana whenua in terms of daylighting streams, or how we basically urban nahere and how the kind of native bush plays a role in the city rather than outside of the city, how we can bring that in. So there is heaps and heaps of work, a lot of it kind of going into Let's Get Valley Moving. But personally, I'm very optimistic and happy that this is happening, and we have improved, still have a lot of mahi to do. Angela, all yours.
And me, I'm almost starting my urban design career when I pass, so hopefully, but as far as my architecture goes, I think it's really important to have that conversation. We've done a bit of work with Whitireia, and funnily enough, they worked with Catherine Munro for the heads at the QT, so we always like to engage, and that's all you can do. And that's obviously, once you get into urban design, that's very much about talking to the people, getting people's feedback, and that's everybody. And it's really important to have everybody speaking back to you and encouraging that conversation, because it is a conversation in order to get all of those, every aspect of Wellington and its Indigenous and its current population and all those other cultures that are going to come here over the years. It's really important to include everybody in that conversation.
Any other questions? Thanks. Would you like to introduce yourself first? Is there a microphone coming this way?
Watch out.
Good, right.
It's me. Hi there, I am Alexi Trenuth from Wellington City Council and the really annoying skateboard person. I don't just look after skateboarders. Thanks so much for being here, guys. Look after lots of different marginalised communities, and I love what you're saying about that democratisation of design, because a lot of the people that we're working with have got a real distrust of council, and so a lot of the work that I've done for the last few years with the skateboarders has been building trust and saying that, look, if you come and talk to us, we're going to listen and we're going to try and make a difference, because it's been years and years of actions by the council to make them feel distrustful of council, and that's the same for lots of different communities. I just wanted to ask what, I suppose it's going to your PhD, Farzad, about how to build that trust and how that, how do you see a future that, because going out and saying just come and talk to us is one thing, but actually it's kind of, there's a lot more layers to that, and there's the accessibility aspect of it and the way that we work, and I think, I just wanted to kind of put that out there and see how we could change that.
I will ask Sophie to answer that too. But I think one of the first things is that the people who work in council, they matter. And having people that they kind of look and represent the society is kind of important. So as part of a recruitment strategy, I always try to get people from different backgrounds, people who traveled the world, people who have seen the different sides of the life. And so that's the first thing. The second thing, and that's my personal approach, and I know that's not necessarily always the case, but always when we deal with the design projects, I always say, go as a person, as a human being, don't send bloody survey forms. People hate that kind of shit. Just talk to them, have a coffee with them, have a drink with them, understand where they're coming from, and talk to them like that. You don't need to talk like a formal bureaucrat. Talk to people exactly their own language, because you live in that society. We are not that different. And also, I think acknowledging our mistakes and owning that is kind of quite important, not kind of being arrogant in terms of, we're doing all the best that we can. No, we've done mistakes as council, and we need to do better. So, and I think the moment you go to a meeting and say, I know we've done this wrong, and I'm here to try to do better, that completely changed the way that people approach you and people. And there's the usual kind of catchphrases. You need to listen, actively listen, and follow up. One of the key things I always tell people: if you don't have the power and interest to follow up with the feedback, don't engage with people. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of time you engage with people, they provide you feedback, and no one hears back from council. Please, I always tell to my kind of team and my colleagues that if you're not really interested to hear what young people tell you, just don't do it. Just, tell them, sorry, we can't do it. Don't waste their time, because that creates mistrust, which is worse than
That's not asking at all.
And worse than not engaging. I don't know how Sophie deals with that issue.
Well, I mean, I think you're asking from a council perspective, and I'm not. I'm only just kind of new to that whole process. But essentially, we've come because it's one of the ahu, and ahutini is the cultural strategy, and it has these 4 strands. Ahu whenua is one that I'm most passionate about at the moment, as well as alongside ahu hononga, working with mana whenua. Because ahu whenua is about making sure we still have spaces for our communities and for our creatives in the city that are affordable. And we've come across a site in the town belt that has been traditionally managed for 50 years by a community, and because of some changes in the administration at the council and change of rules, suddenly they couldn't do the things they needed to do in that site. And there's been quite a lot of hurt, and I'm not going to go into details because it's kind of still under negotiation, but as far as said, it's like hearing the hurt, and that's suddenly I'm having to go from activist individual to suddenly representing council and saying, I can see that council has been involved in some kind of mistrust and misalignment of understanding, but we can see what you want to do, and we can see this benefit in co-managing or co-creating a future together in this space. So it's very much, like you say, it's got to be individualised and not through random surveys and,
I'd also say that my study was very much on the politics associated with Wellington and Melbourne. And it's listening and reacting to that listening. It's not just sitting there and... I've been to a few council things before Farzad's time, that you go and you get active and say everything, and it's like when the documentation comes out, they'd already made that decision before they asked us to participate. So you know it was a waste of time, and they were just ticking the box. Yep, done participation or done consultation, and really it is. It's about getting that feedback and actually acting on it. You might come back and say, hey, look, we can't act on, even if it's 80% of it, that's fine, but at least if you've taken 20%, then you start to slowly build that trust. And that's what's happened in Melbourne. They've listened. They take, they've had 2,000 people come in, say, hey, look, this is what we need, and they go, great, we're going to try and take all of that on board, and then they go back to the people and say, hey, look what we've done, and it's really about that public recognition that they've taken things on board.
Thanks for the good question. Any further questions? Down here, the microphone's on its way.
Every time when it's winter, bad weather, I just feel I want to move away from Wellington. And so, but then you have a few good days and I change my mind again. But anyway, I just wondering whether it's some really basic thing, because Wellington is so windy and wet and sometimes really miserable during winter time. And is there any possibility to have more shelter space, like like you wait for traffic light, like outside of Parliament, you got those shelter space, but then you go to certain bus stop during after hour, and you see like the one outside the old Burger King building, is that the Manor Street, and you will see a whole lot of people standing in the rain, and just not very well thought after. Well, my dream is that possible to have shelter space along the waterfront, because a lot of people go after work, they just walk there, and if we can have more shelter space, and another even bigger dream is along the bays or in the city suburb, to have more shelter space so people actually can still come out in the especially a lot of people got kids or something. We carry a lot of stuff, and it's just really hard when it's not weatherproof. Almost like you just stay home, don't go out at all.
Look, thank you for that question. And there is schools of thought that say that the expertise of the community and the public is actually about informing of needs and uses and values. And this is exactly what you've been asking for, Faz. So I think you have to respond to this.
I'm going to solve all the problems.
Thank you.
I can't really fix the weather problem, but this is exactly what I was kind of talking to ask for these things. One of the things that we did in the district plan, they showed me the map of all the shelters, and I could find a few gaps that, if you consider from walking from Mount Vic to the Parliament, which is where basically my girlfriend walks from, it was like, what are the chances that you get wet through that, whole walk? And I found a few gaps, so I talked to the planning team and I was like, can we make sure that you have multiple routes from one side of the city to the other side under a shelter? And the GIS team did some analysis and they found that actually is possible. So they added quite a number of layers of kind of, what is it called, the canopy. You have to add a canopy when you build a new building. So that was the first thing that we did, mainly for that issue. We know that, and it kind of stopped the wind coming down and the rain. And so, but in terms of adding shelters to the vast area of the waterfront or the city, that's possible. probably, I'm going to be honest, we haven't thought about this, but I can imagine all the obstacles that we're going to face with different teams that they want to put shelters around, so we have to fight that. But if you write that to council and say, I need shelter in these specific locations, it comes to probably me and the traffic team and a number of other people, and we have to sit together and either give you a very strong no, that this is not possible, or we actually, and we have to give you reasons, because that's how it works. You can judicially review our decision to giving you no, but that's the power that you have. You can force us to think about something that we never thought about, and that's a specific location. You want to have shelter because you feel people are standing in the rain. And that's the power that you all have to ask for these kind of things. If you ask for a network of kind of shelters, council love kind of that kind of policy type of work, and eventually that become a thing. But go for it, ask for it. If you really write to me specifically that I want to have shelters in this specific location, I promise you I will follow up with that and make sure that we get shelters.
There you go. Thank you. Thanks, Faz. I'm still left with a question in my mind about how do you scale up this interface? And across New Zealand, we're approaching a time of huge change in terms of the living environment and an encouragement to actually open up permission for instance, much taller buildings, much more intensification. How do you jump from, yes, your team is responsive on the question about achieving more shelter, but how does it actually impact something that's going to make huge changes to the cities starting from now and in the very near future?
Well, it hasn't happened, so I really don't know how it's going to work out, because we barely get any requests from people asking for shelters or anything. Either it comes through a really formal process and we deal with it in a timely manner, but if we start kind of being inundated by requests to deal with specific issues, normally the way that it works is that we have to either kind of expand our team to deal with that. You know, we have a big team, and a few of them here, they're quite hard-working people, so they can manage that to some extent, but eventually we need to kind of either come up with a solution to deal with large number of participation from people. Again, that never happens, so I really don't know how we're going to deal with that, but it would be great. Like, bring it on. I'm going to deal with the issue of how to deal with it. We will find a solution. We go to next council and ask politicians for more, resources and budget to hire more young people to deal with people's requests to put shelters.
Can I also answer that? Well, Faz was dealing with answering everyone's emails. I'm thinking that as we get a very much more dense, and you can begin to see that up at Taranaki Street and GC Streets and so on, you can imagine, tens of thousands more people living there. I guess I'm hoping that we end up with a much more democratic kind of residency going on. I mean, we had a tradition of body corporates, but I would imagine something more kind of dynamic, like a municipal system where you actually have representations through to council potentially. I mean, this is me kind of speculating. If you've ever spent time in Barcelona, they've got this very good system where each neighbourhood has a representative through to the council that then represents onto the main council. And I think we're going to have to think about ways in which we get our residents more involved in their own spaces. There are parks being developed which could involve the people living around it as co-guardians, if you like. So I'm thinking this is a kind of speculative thought, but I imagine we don't want everyone having to email Faz, right?
But that's a really good problem to have. Really engaged society.
Sure, but with each other is what I guess my point is. As much as, they're coming to you saying we are a group of, 3,000 residents living up Taranaki Street, we would like to do X. That would be a better problem to have than one person
and this
saying...
is where social media comes in. Social media is going to play a big role in the way that we see our city in the future. It's going to teach everybody about what's going on. That's the ideal, the newspaper, social media, everything's stuff, because everybody reads online now. But it's going to have, every single day, it's going to have 1 or 2 articles about what's happening in the city.
It's kind of interesting. I told you to put the politicians aside, and I think people literally did that. Like, well, you've got councillors, you can really write to them and ask them to basically, they're representative in council, and they ask us to do certain things for you. So still, they have some level of representation in council, so you don't need to directly write to us as the officers. You've got your politicians.
Elections are you referring to?
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is that at the more granular level, I mean, if any of the councillors had representation from a group of well-thinking, developed residents who weren't just complaining about the number of parks. Like, I tried my time on being the Brooklyn Residents Association chair, and I thought it was going to be about big visions and waterways, and ended up being about parking a lot of the time. Anyway, but I mean, I think with the right format, we can practice.
Or even just a group of people getting together.
Yeah.
Don't have to be associated in any way.
Yeah, and
it's about getting
common, the bigger issue binds people, and I think then that can lead towards a kind of more step democracy too.
I mean, I know I keep coming back to social media, but the amount of, there's Mount Victoria Dog Society, thing, and there's Mount Victoria this, and only because I'm sort of in that, but it's there's so many. I think I belong to probably about 3 or 4 little groups that have, and Iona Planet was part of one of them actually. So I think that's just going to grow, and I think it has to be social media because it's so immediate. It's right here,
That's great. Now we're going to wind up here, but there are drinks and nibbles afterwards, and I think all the panellists are actually going to be there. So please carry on the discussion if you feel. Yes. Oh yes, and the book. So, Sophie, you've bought some copies of the book, and they are available there.
They are. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to having a longer flick through it because it actually looks really interesting. Look, we are going to wind up, and I can't help thinking that there's a group of people here who are perfectly placed to make bigger wishes known in many ways. And I'd like each of you to think about how that can actually affect a project that you're on at the moment, or how can more activity be introduced into the processes that you're involved with, because this is a really ongoing discussion, and we've heard some openness tonight from council that has surprised me, and I think I'm not sure if Farzad is going to regret what he's invited tonight, but go for it.
You don't know how many people are online out there.
Yes, and be ambitious and be active. Thank you all for coming tonight, and please everybody thank our panellists, Farzad Zamani, Sophie Jerram, and Angela Foster. Thank you.